Why do you feel unmotivated, even when you genuinely want to do more? You have goals, you know what matters, and yet when it's time to act, you feel stuck, heavy, and unable to start. And this isn't just a mindset issue. It's the result of how your brain calculates effort, reward, and survival. Motivation is not simply willpower. It is a biological process shaped by dopamine, cognitive load, emotional state, and learned experience. And when these systems become imbalanced, your brain reduces motivation as a protective mechanism rather than a failure. Let's start with dopamine, because this is where most people misunderstand motivation. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of anticipation and action, and its primary role is to signal whether something is worth the effort required to pursue it, which means your brain is constantly asking one question: is this worth doing right now? When your brain predicts that a task has high effort and uncertain or delayed reward, dopamine signaling decreases, which reduces your willingness to act. And this is why tasks that are vague, long, or unclear feel so difficult to start, even if they are important. Now let's go deeper into reward prediction error, one of the most important concepts in neuroscience. Your brain continuously compares expected reward with actual reward, and when outcomes are worse than expected, dopamine decreases. And when this happens repeatedly over time, your brain lowers its baseline expectations. This creates a state where even meaningful activities feel less rewarding, because your brain has learned not to expect much from effort, which is one of the core mechanisms behind chronic low motivation. Now add a psychological layer to this. According to expectancy value theory, motivation depends on two things: how much you value the outcome and how much you believe your effort will lead to that outcome. And if either of these is low, if you don't see the value clearly, or you don't believe your actions will make a difference, your motivation drops significantly. This connects directly to learned helplessness, a well-established psychological phenomenon where repeated experiences of failure, lack of control, or low reward teach your brain that effort does not change outcomes. And when this belief forms, your brain stops investing energy into action because it predicts that effort is wasted. Now let's talk about burnout. Burnout is not just physical tiredness. It is a state of emotional exhaustion, reduced motivation, and cognitive fatigue. And from a biological perspective, it involves dysregulation of stress hormones like cortisol, along with reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and altered dopamine signaling. When your brain is in a burnout state, it actively suppresses motivation to prevent further overload, which is why rest alone doesn't always fix it. You also need to restore meaningful engagement and reduce chronic stress. Another critical factor is cognitive load. Your brain has limited working memory capacity, primarily managed by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And when you are constantly processing information, making decisions, and switching attention, your cognitive load increases to a point where your brain starts conserving energy. One of the easiest ways to conserve energy is to reduce motivation, because motivation requires effort, planning, and sustained attention. And when your brain is overloaded, it shifts toward low-effort behaviors. Now consider modern environments. You're constantly exposed to high-stimulation inputs, social media, short videos, notifications, and these create rapid dopamine spikes followed by drops, which over time leads to dopamine dysregulation, where baseline motivation decreases because your brain becomes less sensitive to normal levels of reward. This creates a cycle where low-effort, high-reward activities feel easier, and meaningful but effortful activities feel harder, even if they are more important. Now, let's connect all of this into one system. Your brain predicts effort and reward through dopamine, adjusts expectations through reward prediction error, evaluates meaning through expectancy value processes, adapts to repeated outcomes through learned helplessness, and protects itself from overload through cognitive fatigue and burnout. When all of these factors align in the wrong direction, your brain reduces motivation, not because you are lazy, but because it is trying to optimize survival and energy efficiency. Now let's translate this into real life. You sit down to work, but the task feels unclear and heavy. Your brain predicts high effort and low reward, dopamine drops, cognitive load increases, and your limbic system pushes you towards something easier, like checking your phone. You delay, you feel temporary relief, but later you feel worse, which reinforces the belief that starting is difficult and unpleasant, and this strengthens the cycle. Over time, your brain learns that avoiding is easier than engaging, and motivation becomes weaker. Now, here's the key insight. Motivation does not come before action. Action creates motivation. From a neuroscience perspective, small actions generate feedback, which increases dopamine signaling, reduces uncertainty, and updates reward prediction, making the next action easier. So, how do you fix this? First, reduce perceived effort by breaking tasks into extremely small, specific steps, because your brain responds better to clear actions than abstract goals, and this lowers cognitive load and increases the likelihood of starting. Second, create immediate feedback loops, because your brain needs reward signals to maintain motivation, and even small progress markers can increase dopamine and reinforce behavior. Third, reduce environmental overstimulation, allowing your dopamine system to reset so that normal tasks feel more engaging again. Fourth, rebuild belief in effort by creating consistent small wins, because learned helplessness can only be reversed through repeated experiences where effort leads to outcome. Fifth, manage cognitive load by simplifying decisions and reducing unnecessary inputs, giving your prefrontal cortex the capacity to function properly. And finally, allow recovery, because without rest, your brain will continue to suppress motivation as a protective mechanism. Because motivation is not something you are missing. It is something your brain is regulating. And when you understand the system, you can change the system. If you found this helpful, subscribe to Nexplain